The off-road vehicle left the town. Charles did not kill the townsfolk, not because he was soft-hearted, but because he did not care about their lives at all. In any case, people with that kind of mindset wouldn't be able to survive anywhere for long. As long as those who had wanted to kill his parents were dead, he was satisfied. Whether the rest of the trash lived or died had nothing to do with him. What Charles found lacking wasn't the moral strength of the townsfolk, but their intelligence. Charles really did not have much anger toward them. He had been in the post-apocalyptic world for 10 years. He had seen the gamut of human behavior and had become numb to much of it. He didn't say anything along the way. They drove in silence. Everyone had their own thoughts to think. Their impressions of Charles had deepened once again. In the past, they had thought that Charles was a cold and ruthless person, very dangerous. But compared to those so-called simple and honest townsfolk, Charles gave his people a sense of complete security. It grew late. Charles chose a residential building as a temporary shelter. There was no need to worry about the people who had lived in the building returning. Because there were a few zombies around, the doors and windows had been locked and fortified. Charles had confiscated a few tents in the previously abandoned refugee camp, but if there was a proper house to stay in, they would take it. Before we go to bed, let's make arrangements for the night vigil. Charles took out a mechanical watch and placed it on the table. In order to prevent people from falling asleep during their shift and getting us all killed, there must be 2 people on duty. If one finds their companion asleep, they must wake him up. His vigilance regarding his surroundings was indeed very strong. With the awakening of the lightning cadaver serpent, his precautions expanded. However, the leader couldn't take on all the security work. Putting aside his prestige in the group, if something happened to Charles, or if he was not by their side when danger struck, the others needed to be prepared. After the night vigil was set, Charles began to explain the setting of simple traps to everyone. The traps he taught were dangerous. When one was not familiar with them, they could easily hurt themselves. Because it was related to their safety, everyone listened very carefully. Before going to sleep, Mr. Federer called out to his son, "Charlie!" Charles came over to him. He looked at Charles meaningfully. "You were acting today, weren't you?" Charles nodded and did not deny it. Although his clothes were torn, he was not injured at all. Even if this could be explained away by the girls' treatment, it would be miraculous if not a single trace of blood remained. However, there was no need for him to explain. Mr. Federer did not seem to care too much about the matter. "I know you have your own opinions. I know you have a moral bottom line, so I don't have to worry about that. No matter what decisions you make, Mom and I will support you." Charles felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had changed a lot compared with his previous life, but his parents hadn't changed at all. They didn't ask him why he had become so cruel all of a sudden. They just trusted him without reservation. "In this world, advising people to be kind is tantamount to advising them to die," Charles said grimly. Mr. Federer continued, "Charlie, I won't say anything else. I just want to remind you, if you can, think about the future. Think about where you and Alice will live. Think about how you want your child to grow up if you have a child." In his previous life, Charles lived in a state of burning hatred and never looked past the present moment. But in this life, with his family by his side, he had to plan for the future, for himself, and the people around him. Mr. Federer patted him on the shoulder, then left Charles alone to think quietly. After a quiet night, the dawn arrived. Charles acted as if nothing had happened. He maintained a cold, intimidating expression on his face. After breakfast, they resumed their journey. The driver did not dare to let Charles drive again. Otherwise, what was his purpose? Sitting in the back of the car, Charles's goal gradually came into clear focus. "I want to build a huge survival base and be the person who sets the rules. Even in this dark post-apocalyptic world, I want to create a place that can shelter my family from the wind and rain. The darkness of the outside world will not be allowed to enter." This seemed to be a very simple goal. However, only after 10 years of scrabbling to survive in the apocalypse could one understand the price one had to pay to achieve it. From the smallest town to the biggest city, people would habitually exclude people who were different from them. If you don't want social rejection, then you have to assimilate, Charles thought to himself. In such an environment, it was very difficult for anyone who wanted to go against the current, even if only to protect themselves. because the enemy was the entire environment itself. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to cultivate a pure land. However, if he didn't dare to set bigger goals, what was the point of living a new life? The building of the city wall, once abandoned, has now begun again, Charles thought. Charles couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the tall city wall in the distance, still under construction but nearing completion. City walls could effectively defend against the attacks of enemies during the era of primitive weapons and provide safe shelter for humans. However, in the era of firearms, they'd gradually been abandoned. In this time, when humans could only retreat in the face of endless monsters, the concept of the city wall was taken up again. As they drew close to the fortress city, an official approached. "Stop the car for check-in, please," the official said. The official explained, "According to our statistics and research, people infected with the zombie virus will display symptoms within an hour. So please get out of the car and spend an hour in quarantine. Don't move around." Charles nodded, showing his understanding and cooperation. Then he got out of the car. This concerned everyone's safety. No one was allowed special privileges. Seeing Charles's cooperation, the inspector heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Thank you for understanding." There were too many people in this world who thought they were special. It was a blessing to meet someone who didn't give him any trouble. At this moment, the group behind them suddenly erupted into hysteria. They yelled, "Quickly, bring us to the hospital!" A young man screamed, "You don't know how serious my parents' injuries are. If you delay their treatment, I will make all of you pay with your lives." There was an old man beside him. It was obvious that he didn't have much time left. The official responded, "This is a matter that concerns everyone's safety. No one gets special treatment." Another staff member said sternly, "We cannot compromise everyone's safety. No one is allowed to enter until an hour has passed." Sobbing in fear and frustration, the young man shouted, "Don't you have parents? If your parents were dying, they would be locked out by this damn rule. What would you do?" The staff member was moved, but he said, "I can understand your concern for your parents, but this rule is for everyone's safety. I cannot put everyone in danger just because I sympathize with you. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have to take forceful measures." The larger crowd waiting to enter the city divided into two groups. The first group supported the young man by threatening the staff. They wanted nothing more than to kill their way through the barricade in the name of this devoted son. The crowd jeered, "You can see how pitiful he is. So what if you let one person in? Rules are dead and people are alive. Life is important. Hurry up and let us through, or I'll let you see how powerful we are." There were also people who supported the staff. They reasoned, "You can't risk everyone for a single person. That's right, this rule is for the good of everyone. We can't let them pass." The two divisions began to quarrel, causing a huge commotion. Various people yelled, "The rules are for saving people, but you are using them to harm people. If you break the rules, you are harming people. Look at them, who can they hurt?" Charles was too tired to explain the facts to these people. Instead, he said to the young man, "If you really want to be good to your father, then let's take this opportunity to release him. If he turns into a monster and causes harm to himself or others, he will be condemned by his conscience." Charles's words immediately aroused the anger of the crowd. They shouted, "Why are you doing this? This is life. Do you know what's good for you? Is life so worthless in your eyes?" The young man was even more furious. He stood by his father's side and scolded Charles. "Don't you have parents? You are an inhumane beast. You deserve to die." Charles's eyes remained cold, as if he were looking at a dead man. As the young man was about to continue scolding Charles, his father suddenly reached out his hand and held his son back. The young man turned his head. "Dad, why are you—" "Ah!" The old man suddenly pulled his son in front of him. Then he opened his mouth wide and bit the young man's neck. He tore out a large piece of flesh and began to chew. The young man let out a miserable cry. Regret filled his eyes. The crowd who had been supporting the son and denouncing Charles immediately scrambled away from the young man's side to avoid the ferocious zombie. The official broke out in a cold sweat. He shouted hoarsely, "Reinforcements! Quickly! Send for reinforcements!" The young man's eyes widened as he clutched his neck, as if he meant to press the gushing blood back in with his hands. Charles said to the young man, "Is this what your father wants to see? Does your father want to see his son die because of his infection?" The young man's eyes were full of regret and pain, but he could not make a sound. Charles raised the bone spike in his hand. You are beyond help now. If you do not want to harm others, just nod. I will release you both. Tears flowed from the young man's eyes. Then he nodded his head heavily. Charles's energy sword swept through the air, taking the lives of the young man and his father. The zombie virus serum had yet to be developed, so Charles could not save them. The crowd fell silent. They finally understood the need for the staff to isolate each of them. If the young man's father had turned into a zombie inside the fortress, the safety of the entire community would have been threatened. But not everyone understood. One man cried out, "You killed someone! Police, come quickly! He killed someone! Quickly, arrest him!" The man's eyes were filled with fear and jealousy. Charles looked at his face coldly. If it wasn't for the fact that there were so many people here, the man wouldn't have dared to shout at Charles. Faced with this person's idiotic behavior, the crowd cursed. Do you understand how many people that zombie would have killed if this person hadn't made a move just now? He saved your life, and you still dare to speak like that? I've seen shameless people, but you take the cake. Facing the criticism of the crowd, he didn't seem bothered at all. Who said that this young man must die? He was only doing his best to show family loyalty. If not for this person interfering, the young man might not have been bitten by his father. It was he who caused harm to others. Everyone was stunned by this person's audacity. What kind of environment could produce such a weirdo? At this moment, a convoy stopped at the checkpoint. An officer in a military uniform got out of a car and asked about the situation. The angry man ran to the officer in a frenzy. He pointed at Charles and shouted, "He killed people! He killed people! We all saw it just now! Everyone saw it! Hurry up and kill him!" The young officer looked at the corpses on the ground and asked, "Are you talking about this person on the ground here?" He emphasized the word person, but the other man did not notice. The man said excitedly, "That's right. It was him who killed this person on the ground. We saw it all. Hurry up and kill him!" Bang! A gunshot rang out. The officer lowered the smoking pistol in his hand and said casually, "If anyone causes trouble for no reason and affects the order of the entire organization, execute them immediately." The crazy man who had accused Charles widened his eyes and fell to the ground. The surrounding crowd immediately took a few steps back and looked at the young soldier with fear in their eyes. The officer said loudly, "This is an unusual time. Countless people die every minute, every second. Every trivial complaint delays us, meaning hundreds and thousands of people will not be able to get help. In this sense, the troublemaker becomes the murderer." Hearing the officer's words, some people's eyes registered dissatisfaction. However, in the end, they did not protest. The officer said, "I don't know how innocent you are, and I don't care about the beliefs you hold in your hearts. No matter what you think or how you feel, you have to cooperate with us now." He continued, "If you are dissatisfied with my actions, you can sue me in military court. My name is Lewis Harvey. If you want to sue me, you are free to do so. But if you want to disrupt public order and endanger public safety, I will have to kill you." As he spoke, a fireball leaped from his hand and incinerated the young man's and his father's bodies to ashes. The crowd murmured, "A paranormal from the military? He's a paranormal." Harvey's identity as a paranormal gave him a foreboding air. No one dared to make a sound. Facing a person who didn't even give a warning before shooting a man, they were instantly cowed into obedience. The members of the convoy began to check people one by one. Everyone acted in an orderly manner. There was not the slightest bit of chaos. At this time, Harvey saw Charles. He excitedly approached Charles and said, "It's you. Thank you for your help last time. If you need anything, feel free to ask." He didn't understand why Charles had insisted on giving all the credit to Kevin Neal, a bodyguard captain. After all, if Charles hadn't helped them, who could say how many people would have perished? Later, when Neal introduced the cultivation technique to them, he mentioned Charles's name. He claimed that, without Charles's help, many more people would have died during the experimental stage of the cultivation technique. This made them greatly admire the nameless hero who didn't want any recognition. Charles said, "I came here to find my sister. Where's the place where you register people?" Although he did not want to owe people favors, he did not dare to be careless when it came to his sister. For Lena, it had only been a few months since she had last seen Charles, but Charles had been looking for her for 10 years. No problem. The military will never mistreat anyone who has contributed so selflessly. Harvey turned to the staff and said, "Open the door and let him in. He will be traveling with me now. I will bear all the consequences of his actions and those of his party. If anything happens, I'll handle it." The staff answered, "We will let him in immediately." No one questioned why they had the privilege. The corpses on the ground were the answer. "I thought the military would maintain their ideals," Charles said. Charles admired Harvey very much. In times of chaos, there must be a strict code. It was the pragmatic choice to kill those who interfere with the Army's efforts. The lives of such people would not do anyone any good. They served only to drag others down. Harvey's eyes were tired. "Some officers have protested my actions. They are all imprisoned now." "That doesn't sound like such a bad thing," Charles said. After a while, the imprisoned officers would come on board, once they understood the dangerous situation they were in. The Army needed good men too desperately to let them rot in cells. Harvey said, "That's right. Killing a few malcontents increases the efficiency of the rescue teams dramatically. That's why the search efficiency of my team is the highest in the battalion. It's twice the average. Now some have begun to imitate me." Charles nodded. In his previous life, the Army had changed its attitude after learning some bitter lessons. However, institutional inertia made it almost impossible for the military to adapt. Introducing Kevin Neal to the idea of training the Army in this timeline had apparently gone some distance toward changing this. This was the butterfly effect. Small changes could have profound consequences. With a light flap of its wings, a butterfly could set off huge storms in the future. On the way in, Charles saw a group of people kicking and beating a person on the roadside. Such scenes had become commonplace. There was not a single spectator to react in horror or cheer them on. When they saw the Army approaching, they immediately scattered, like a flock of startled birds. "Looks like you guys are no longer able to maintain security in the city," Charles said to Harvey. Harvey's eyes dimmed. "The number of soldiers is limited," he said. "We need to focus on more important problems." Priorities had to remain fluid. For the Army, now was the best time to organize the evacuation of the survivors. The longer the evacuation dragged on, the higher the death rate of the survivors. The security of the fortress was important, but compromises had to be made. With Harvey's help, Charles quickly found out where his sister lived, which lifted his spirits tremendously. Harvey further cheered him by reporting, "We have developed radios that work in this environment, but we still need some time to mass produce them. Come to us in a few days and ask for one. This way, we can contact each other when we need help." In fact, the Army wanted to return Charles's favor. It had been a great boon to inspire Neal to prioritize teaching the Army martial arts. Now, if Charles ran into trouble, they would do whatever they could to help. Charles did not decline. Now was not the time to act the hero. Although he did not need much help now, he might need the Army when dealing with Leonard Shaw in the future. After Harvey left them, Charles and the others found his sister's residence according to the address provided by the Army. However, when they arrived, they saw Lena's quarters were surrounded by a large group of men. Their leader was an arrogant man in his 30s. Beside him, a man who looked like a lackey said, "Little girls, don't be so coy. We have tolerated you for a long time. Let me tell you, only Tony B has such a mild temper. Don't make us use force." Charles's eyes turned cold. The familiar voice of Harper Allen, one of Lena's friends, came from the inside. "If anything happens to us, all of you will be buried along with us." The lackey said smugly, "Do you think that Kevin Neal will be able to protect all of you? Even if he is a capable fighter, he's only a normal man. Let me tell you, our Tony B has just joined a paranormal alliance. There are 11 paranormals in it already. 11. Another lackey echoed, "You know what a paranormal can do? 11 high and mighty people. What can Neal do against that?" Hearing their words, Charles muttered to himself. The embryonic form of the paranormal alliances appeared just like that. Some paranormals, like Zach Potter and Miranda Ellington, would try their best to protect and help as many people as possible. However, there were also some paranormals who felt that ordinary people were only burdens. If they had some ordinary people in their crew, it was for the sake of convenience. In some ways, Charles was like this, but he respected and admired the likes of Zach and Miranda, and he would aid them to the extent that doing so didn't interfere with his agenda. It was common for paranormals to join forces. However, this paranormal alliance was not yet mature. It was only a small group. As the lackey continued his threats, Tony B suddenly took a step forward, silencing him. Tony B said, "Harper, Lena, Blair, I have reached the limit of my tolerance toward you all." Tony B had a domineering look on his face. "Since you guys treat Kevin Neal as your protector, I will kill him. Then you can beg for mercy all you like, but it will be too late." Another lackey chimed in. "Neal is just an awakened for the surgical enhancement type. He doesn't have any advantage over us elemental types. Killing him will establish our Black Eagle Squadron's prestige." At this moment, a hand suddenly rested on Tony B's shoulder. "Just now you said you intended to attack Lena Federer?" a voice asked. When this voice, thick with cold-killing intent, came from behind him, Tony B could not help but tremble. Even though he was a paranormal, he instinctively felt afraid. However, his anger and arrogance quickly eclipsed his fear. He snapped, "Kid, who are you? How dare you meddle in my business?" "I'm the one who wants your life," the voice said. A gleaming sword beam slashed through the air. Tony B felt a chill in his lower body, and then an alarming amount of blood gushed out. "Ah!" An intense scream came from Tony B's mouth, causing the tough guy image that he had created to instantly collapse. Everyone took a step back simultaneously, feeling chills run down their spines. You're going to die." Tony B's eyes were filled with humiliation and rage. He had been savagely unmanned. However, just as he was about to make a move, he felt an intense pain coming from his right arm. "Ah!" Tony B screamed. Charles had grabbed his right arm and crushed the bones, inch by inch. The intense pain almost made Tony B lose consciousness. He begged desperately, "Bro, I was wrong." Charles slapped him and broke his chin, making him stammer and unable to beg for mercy. "Water screen shield," Charles cried. A water screen shield appeared in front of Charles, blocking a fireball that had been launched at him. "Two paranormals?" the group gasped. Everyone was shocked. The lackeys quickly moved back to avoid being affected by the fight between the paranormals. If they were hit by the smallest spark generated by the fight, they could die. Charles kicked Tony B's knee. "Friend, forgive us." The paranormal who had launched the fireball tried to persuade him. "We didn't know these girls were your friends. Since it was all a misunderstanding, who said it was a misunderstanding?" Charles did not show any interest in their pleas for peace. "We have 11 paranormals in the Black Eagle Squadron," the man said, dropping his humble act. "So what if you have 2? No one can save you if you offend us." At this moment, Harper opened the door and came outside. She said in surprise, "Charles!" When Lena saw his familiar figure, she rushed out and said, "Charlie!" Charles wanted to throw his arms around his sister, but he couldn't, given the current circumstances. He patted Lena's back and said, "Good to see you. Go inside with Mom and Dad. I will catch up with you after I settle this matter." He didn't know if Lena's disappearance in his previous life had anything to do with these people, but they had dared to threaten her. He couldn't let any of them go. He had already sentenced these people to death. "Mom and Dad are here too?" Lena asked. Lena was overjoyed, but she turned around and said anxiously, "Charlie, don't fight with them. Superpowered people are very dangerous." "I know. It's fine," Charles said. He told his parents, "Mom and Dad, you guys stay with Lena for a while." Everyone shifted uncomfortably when they saw Charles's expression. Did he really mean to kill all of the hooligans outside? Harper said anxiously, "This is a fortress city. If there's a lot of commotion, the army will not sit by and do nothing." She had seen Charles's most ruthless side. She knew that as long as Charles felt that these people deserved to die, none of them would survive. However, if he violated the laws of the fortress city, there would be no place for them to stay. Tony B's face was a bitter mask of pain as he said, "That's right. You're dead for sure. The army will not let this go." Charles frowned. So why weren't you creeps worried about the army when you were about to attack these girls? Harper stuttered. Well, but we need someone to testify. The truth was, there were very few people who dared to criticize the powerful paranormals, no matter how heinous their actions. Charles said, I understand. You guys go in. Harper felt uneasy. Glancing at Tony B on the ground, she pulled Lena away. Charlie, this is too dangerous. Lena tried hard to break free from Harper, but her struggling gave the martial artist little trouble. Harper reassured her, You're underestimating your brother. Mr. and Mrs. Federer followed their daughter into the house. They had a bad feeling about the situation, but they were determined to shelter Lena from whatever might transpire. Some of the lackeys tried to run away, but they were stopped by Hugh, Tommy, and Tina. Tommy kicked out savagely and broke a man's knee, causing him to scream in pain. He said, We can't let you guys escape. Don't want to tick off the boss. Tina held a dagger in her hand. All of you, don't make another move. If you try to sneak away, you will die screaming. The lackey said incredulously, Are they all superpowered people? Another group of paranormals? The lackeys were filled with fear. As far as they understood, anyone stronger than an ordinary person was superpowered. They hadn't expected to encounter so many expert warriors just by following their boss to bully a few girls. You, what are you going to do? They asked Tony B. Tony B was a paranormal of the surgical enhancement type. He had barely managed to stop his own bleeding, and his legs were still weak. He knew that the situation had gone beyond his control. Karmic Fire Talisman, Charles shouted. Charles's hand burned with blue flames, which incinerated Tony B in seconds. With a smirk, Charles asked the horrified lackeys, Hey, where did Tony B go? I swear he was just here. Was it all a hallucination? None of them dared speak, fearing they would be the next to burn. He turned to the fire-powered paranormal and hooked his finger. You're coming with me. After handing over the lackeys to Hugh, Tommy, and Tina, Charles brought Alice and Sylvia with him to investigate the so-called Black Eagle Squadron. The fire-powered paranormal led the way. Is it your territory? Charles looked at the broken-down factory before them and frowned. This is a base for superpowered people? Why does it look like a street gang hangout? The city wall outside was new. The buildings inside the wall were what remained after the zombies had been cleaned up. Many were in good condition, but the factory before them was an unsightly ruin. The fire-powered man seemed a little embarrassed. It wasn't my idea. Charles narrowed his eyes. The best thing about this place is its location, far from other buildings. You won't be disturbed here. Good spot to get up to something shady. The fire-powered man cleared his throat uneasily. What Charles said next made him turn pale with fright. Forget it, you were useless anyway. His instinct was to run away. He released 2 fireballs to cover his retreat, but they were instantly extinguished by a floating globe of water. He still tried to move, but the world spun wildly around him. His vision began to blur. I led you here. I was cooperating, the fire-powered man yelled. Charles sneered as he refined the man's energy. Do you think I didn't know that you were hoping your comrades would kill me? The old order had just collapsed. The new order had not yet been established. Therefore, it was understandable that the flame-powered man assumed that Charles was still bound by the morals of the old era. Understandable, but wrong. After absorbing the paranormal psychic energy, Charles severed his head, kicked open the door, and threw the head inside. Who is it? A middle-aged man leaped up from his chair, startled when he saw what had rolled in. Ah! Alerted by the banging door, a large group of people rushed in to investigate the situation. They demanded, What's going on? What's your name? Are you challenging the Black Eagle Squadron? Bastard! Who threw that head in here? As it was a newly formed gang of hooligans, the members were not very familiar with one another. Most of them did not recognize the head for a moment. One of them looked closer. Isn't this our man? Everyone looked at the 3 people at the door with killing intent in their eyes. They jeered. I see you're really tired of living. Yo, 2 beautiful women. They are much prettier than the ones we captured earlier. There are beautiful women at our doorstep. Don't waste them. Charles assessed the situation in the factory. There were 3 women locked up in cages. Seeing this, Alice and Sylvia both burned with anger. "Charles, you won't spare them, will you?" Alice asked. Alice's heart was full of murderous rage. She somewhat understood Charles's bloodlust. Even the best people would become devils of slaughter if they regularly encountered this kind of predatory scum. Sylvia cried, "Can it be that this world is really hopeless?" Charles said in a steady voice, "That's not necessarily true. It's just that the places we go are particularly dangerous. People in these places can easily go bad." A young man strode to the front of the gathered members of the Black Eagle Squadron. He seemed offended by Charles's attitude. "What's with the chit-chat? It looks like they don't take us seriously," he said. "Thanks for bringing us these two beauties. Perhaps you can stay behind and be our little mascot." The hooligans laughed without fear, unworried about any threat these uninvited guests might pose to them. They had full confidence in themselves. Alice's and Sylvia's faces turned pale. It was not because they were scared, but because they were furious. They had seen quite a number of bad people, but this was the first time they had seen women kept in cages. Charles regarded the squadron members coldly. Then, his gaze fell on the young man who was apparently leading them. "I sense you're a 4th grade superpower possessor. Being able to reach 4th grade in such a short period of time, no wonder you became so arrogant. Unfortunately, you're going to waste your talent." It was really quite an achievement. The young man was clearly extremely talented. It was a pity that he had met Charles. The young man had a hint of fear in his eyes. "You can actually see my strength?" he asked. This uninvited guest was still a dozen meters away from him, yet he was able to instantly assess his strength, causing the young man to feel a little apprehensive. However, there was no backing down now. 2 paranormals blocked the entrance, preventing Charles and the other 2 from escaping. If he let them go now, he would lose all credibility as a leader. Alice also felt a chill in her heart. This man had reached Tier 4? Until now, she was only at peak Tier 2, preparing to advance to Tier 3. How great was the disparity between them? She glanced at Charles, who was standing in front of her, and felt a calming sense of security. After all, if Charles was here, what was there to be afraid of? Charles ordered, "Attack." He struck out with an earth-shatter talisman, and the entire factory floor began to crack apart. Everyone was knocked off balance, unable to stand steady. The scene was filled with chaos. The group cried, "Ah! What's going on? Why is the ground cracking? Be careful!" These were all paranormals who had awakened not long ago. Their combat experience was not very extensive. This was not a problem when dealing with ordinary zombies and mutant bugs. However, encountering this unexpected attack, they easily panicked. Charles told Alice and Sylvia, "Close your eyes." Following Charles's order, Alice and Sylvia immediately squeezed their eyes shut. A brilliant light then illuminated the entire factory like a dozen suns, blinding the squadron members who hollered, "Ah, my eyes!" The blinding light made it impossible for the squadron to see the enemy. The smarter ones knew to leave their original positions, but the slower ones were sitting ducks. Charles activated 3 Hellfire talismans and 3 Frost talismans, hitting 6 people. 2 of them burned alive with flames from hell and died in despair. One of them was frozen into a macabre ice sculpture, while the other 3 were lucky enough to escape serious injury. Just as Charles was about to chase after them, 4 walls suddenly appeared around him. A solid earthen barrier now surrounded him and the women. The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron roared, "Your petty tricks are nothing compared with absolute strength. Now you'll be crushed by a true warrior." As he spoke, a huge rock appeared in the air and smashed down toward the 3 of them. The squadron members cheered. "Ha ha! Good job! That's what I'm talking about." The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron wore a smug look on his face, saying, "They were just a few petty thieves. They thought they understood real power just because they have a little strength. They actually dared to look down on me. They deserved to die. You guys, go and dig them out for me and throw their bodies out to feed the dogs." However, a trace of regret flashed across his eyes. Because he hadn't held back, he'd killed 2 rare beauties. This loss bothered him a good deal more than the loss of 3 subordinates. No one expressed any sorrow for the squad mates who had died. Showing feelings was frowned upon. Besides, If they brought up their 3 casualties, it would diminish their leader's triumph. They didn't dare question why. If the leader was so powerful, Charles had been able to kill 3 people at the beginning of the fight, when it was 9 against 3. As 2 paranormals of the surgical enhancement type approached the pile of rocks, preparing to dig out the intruders' bodies, the rubble suddenly exploded in all directions. "Ah!" the squad cried. One of the paranormal's eyes widened. He slowly lowered his head to look at his chest. He saw a hand holding a bone spike, which had pierced through his heart. Before the other paranormal could react, his body began burning with a deep blue flame. "Ah, you're not dead?" The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron was stunned. Seeing Charles's sudden reappearance, everyone was shocked. The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron felt a burning pain in his face. He had just displayed his absolute strength in front of the gang, and now he had been humiliated. He had even unknowingly sentenced 2 more of his men to death. Charles retracted the bone spike and gave the leader a mocking look. "A piece of trash like you? Do you think you're qualified to talk about absolute strength? What you said just now sounded quite reasonable. They thought they understood real power just because they have a little strength. But who are you talking about?" Charles's words were like salt in the wound. Burning with shame, the leader screamed, "You will die a horrible death!" As he spoke, a large number of stone pillars erupted around Charles, blocking any escape route. Then, jagged spikes of stone sprouted from the pillars, threatening to impale Charles a dozen times over. "Talking about yourself again, eh?" Charles said. Following Charles's words, the remaining few paranormals suddenly realized that a colorful spell array had appeared under their feet to bind them to the floor. "What is this? Why can't it be broken?" they wondered. A paranormal slashed at the array with a glowing white light sword, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. Next, a blood-red thorny vine wrapped around his entire body, immobilizing him. The thorns pierced his skin and began sucking his blood. What is this?" A sense of powerlessness overwhelmed him. It was the most helpless he had felt since he became unawakened. The same thing was happening to the other paranormals. The huge rock hadn't caused any damage to Charles at all. A wind barrier had blocked it. During the time he spent under the rubble, he had released his essence blood to make spell arrays. Now, only the leader was left. Whoosh! The pile of rocks fell away as Alice and Sylvia emerged from the debris. They had also been completely safe under the protection of the wind barrier. It was only because Charles had asked them to wait for a few more seconds that they appeared now. They walked out of the pile of rubble ready to fight before realizing that the battle was nearing its end. A blood-red, thorny vine had turned a paranormal into a dried corpse. A monster that looked like a sewed-together quilt of animal corpses was chewing the lower half of a person's body. The person watched his body being eaten bit by bit with despair, but he was powerless to do anything. A mass of black energy was corroding another person's body. He seemed to be screaming loudly, but strangely, no sound came from him. The 4th enemy watched as his body rapidly aged and decayed into white bones. He experienced an incomparable despair before his death. The 2 women were dumbstruck. They had thought that this would be a team battle, but in the blink of an eye, only the leader was still alive, along with a group of cannon fodder underlings who were stunned into paralysis. The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron knew that the situation had far exceeded his control. He could not help but take 2 steps back in panic. "Kill everyone here," Charles said. Following Charles's order, the creatures he had summoned from hell began to hunt crazily. The blood-red vines split and pierced the chest of some underlings who were trying to run away. Then they began to suck their blood. The patchwork corpse monster looked bloated, but in fact it moved very quickly. It grabbed its prey and started to eat while continuing to hunt without slowing down. Another of Charles's hell minions, a mage who wore a black robe and looked like a dried corpse, laughed evilly. He waved the staff in his hand, and a black curtain covered the entire factory, stopping anyone from escaping. A gray mist swept past, and whomever it touched crumbled into white bones. The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron felt his legs trembling. He considered himself an evil and ruthless man, a true devil. However, witnessing such a hellish scene, he felt only fear. Charles approached the leader of the Black Eagle Squadron calmly. "Just now, you said that absolute strength could crush anything. So where's your so-called absolute strength? I want to see it." In fact, if the paranormals here had worked together and cooperated well, they might really have posed a threat to Charles. However, these people had only united to abuse others and enjoy themselves. They were not a real team at all. Charles felt the restless lightning cadaver serpent energy quiet down. Such an enemy simply could not arouse its interest. The leader of the Black Eagle Squadron looked at Charles, who did not seem to be on guard, and calculated possible ways to attack. In the end, though, he did nothing. Facing such a terrifying enemy, he could not muster the courage to fight. Charles's footsteps seemed to be in rhythm with the beating of his heart, which made him feel more and more pressured. He kneeled on the ground and begged. "I was wrong," the leader admitted. Anyway, all his subordinates had been killed. There were no witnesses left to make him feel embarrassed as he begged for mercy. Right now, he only wanted to live. Charles stroked his chin and said in a bewitching voice, "Do you want to live?" "Yes," the leader said. The defeated man cowered. Compared with this terrifying man in front of him, even the medicinal zombies in the outside world seemed appealing. Alice and Sylvia looked on. They had always had strong confidence in Charles. They believed that if Charles was with them, there would be no danger at all. However, Charles's strength had exceeded their expectations. Alice could not help but ask, "Why did the two of us even come here?" She felt like she was superfluous. Sylvia just nodded, feeling the same. They might have been useful, but the opponent's performance in battle was pathetic, as disorganized and feeble as a stray cat on the roadside. In comparison, Charles's performance was far beyond Alice's wildest imagining. "Ah!" A shrill scream escaped the leader's mouth. He sobbed. "Don't you want to let me go?" The leader, like many people, believed surrendering and showing contrition somehow entitled them to clemency. But this did not work on Charles. He had seen too many examples of ostensibly defeated people sandbagging, playing possum, until they had an opportunity to reveal a hidden trump card and turn the tables. In fact, from the moment he'd ordered the fire-powered man to lead the way to the squadron's base, he had never let his guard down. He did not kill the leader. After absorbing his essence energy, he left him weak and helpless, but still alive. Then he said to the women who had been imprisoned and abused, "Now I'll give you all a chance to take revenge. However painful the method, however long it takes, is up to you." As he spoke, a beam of sword energy pierced through the air, and the cage doors of the imprisoned women shattered. "Use a healing spell to treat their wounds," Charles ordered. Alice and Sylvia immediately cast a healing spell on the badly abused women and helped them recover quite a bit. Then they emerged from their cages, their faces twisted with rage, and approached the defeated leader. "Do you mean to use these women to humiliate me?" the Black Eagle Squadron's leader asked angrily. "A warrior can be killed, but not humiliated. It's proper for you to kill me, but what's the point of torturing me like this?" Charles sneered. "A warrior? This is a title only humans are entitled to. A dumb beast is not qualified." By his evil acts, the leader had already stripped himself from the human race. Now he was talking about dignity. In Charles's opinion, this was a bad joke. The women pounced on their captor, using their claws to vent their anger. They were slashing and weeping at the same time. Alice could not help but shiver, but she did not stop these women. Instead, she watched. It felt important, somehow, for her to bear witness. While the women took their revenge, Charles called the hell creatures to his side. "The offerings I used to summon you were of the highest quality. According to the contract, you must therefore provide me with service for at least a week," Charles said. The summoning time was determined by the sacrifice. He could also shorten the summoning time to call forth stronger creatures. The creatures released a strange spiritual wail, expressing their willingness to submit. They were inferior creatures in the hell that had spawned them. Now that they had been summoned by Charles, their instincts as inferior creatures made them obedient. Charles put them back into the Essence Mansion to wait until they were needed. Charles had an idea that involved keeping these creatures in this reality for an extended period. He just needed to provide them with enough food, according to the summoning laws of hell. To him, these creatures were only assisting in battle, but to his family, they would be a life-saving nuclear option. As for the food that kept them alive, there were so many mutated creatures in the outside world. The Essence Mansion was a channel that could connect him and his summoned creatures, allowing him to feed them whatever monsters he killed. "All right, let's go," Charles ordered. Sensing a commotion outside, Charles finished off the leader with one sword strike and quickly retreated. The calamitous battle with the paranormals could not be hidden from the military. If the military did not intervene in such crises, the fortress city would have long since fallen. If Charles had to explain this mess to the army personally, it would be a very troublesome matter. But if the army encountered the traumatized women first, the situation would be seen in a different light. They could not shirk responsibility for such an atrocity occurring in an area they were in charge of. The plight of the women would allow Charles to occupy the moral high ground. If the army wanted to interrogate him, his position was unimpeachable. After all, they were the ones at fault. What happened next was just as Charles expected. When the army officers discovered what had happened to the women, they were enraged. They hadn't built such a safe shelter to provide a haven for depraved criminality. Although vigilante justice was not officially approved of, they formed an excellent impression of Charles and privately praised his actions. Charles, Alice, and Sylvia returned to his sister's residence. Under the care of her parents, Lena had calmed down. However, when she looked at Charles, there was a hint of fear in her eyes. In her memory, Charles had always been a sunny and cheerful older brother. After the cataclysm, the thing she longed for the most was to see her brother again. However, upon reuniting with him, she found that Charles had become frighteningly unfamiliar. Seeing his sister's frightened eyes, Charles felt a deep pain in his heart. After reincarnating, he had made up for a lot of regrets, but he could not make up for everything. Mr. Federer said, "Just now, the army came and interrogated us. Lena knew that these people deserved to die. However, she is still unable to accept these things easily. She will be fine in a few days." Charles nodded. Lena had seen too much of the dark side of the world too quickly. Of course, she could not accept it. Driven crazy by the cruelty of the apocalypse, many people turned to suicide. Even Charles himself had spent a long time learning to accept this cruel new reality. Alice pulled Charles aside to a more private spot. "Is this different from the warm reunion that you had hoped for?" she asked. Charles nodded slightly. Alice said, "I have thought about it carefully, following you through this world. Although many of your decisions look cold and cruel on the surface, the facts always prove that you made the right decisions. I thought my forgiveness could turn my friend Pamela, but in fact, it almost destroyed us. Whether it was giving up on ordinary people, fighting with all kinds of monsters, or winning people's hearts, Charles was always right. If it wasn't for Charles, Alice would have died countless times along the way. Even if she had awakened her superpower and been able to face the dangers of the monsters, she would not have been able to guard against the evil hearts of people. And if Charles hadn't made those cruel decisions, he might never have found his sister." "Thank you," Charles forced a smile. He had experienced the darkest years of the apocalypse 10 years ago. He had witnessed too many tragedies. Now, he was made of sorrow. He had lost too many people. Worse, the people he cherished most had all died because of him. His family, friends, and lovers had all died in front of him, and a powerful obsession had formed in his heart. That was to protect his family at all costs. This obsession had almost turned him into a devil. To protect his family, he would not hesitate to make an enemy of the entire world. However, Alice's words reminded Charles of the young man who had pleaded to allow his father to enter the fortress with them. Although the young man had insulted Charles, Charles felt a bit of kinship with him. He was protecting his family, damn the consequences. This need trumped rationality. Alice grew quiet. Charles was someone who did not like others to advise him. He had once lost everything. He understood that if he lost these precious things again, he would be a shell without a soul. Charles lit a cigarette. Maybe life is not the most important thing after all. It is just the carrier of the important things. But I forgot the simplest thing of all, Charles thought. The woman beside him was the meaning of his life. But what about the others? To his parents, their son and daughter were the meaning of their lives. To his sister, her family was also the most important thing in her world. If he persisted like this for the sake of his obsession, it would sooner or later break the hearts of everyone around him. Protecting his family was not wrong, He was just too ruthlessly single-minded about it. He felt a wave of clarity sweep through his mind, and his desperate obsession dissipated, just like that. After he felt his mind clear, the Essence Mansion suddenly expanded. Then, in the very center of the Essence Mansion, a stream of clear energy sprang forth. Alice looked at Charles in alarm. She had only casually comforted him with her words, but Charles seemed to have undergone a tremendous change. After about half an hour, representatives from the military arrived. Charles greeted them with a smile. "Officer Hughes, I didn't expect to see you. I just heard from your men that you had been punished. I'm surprised to see you've resumed carrying out your official duties so soon." Hughes replied, "Our superiors are not idiots. Although Harvey's actions have attracted a lot of criticism, his efficiency in saving people is undeniable. Now the higher-ups have issued new orders. Anyone who hinders the movement of the group will be sentenced to death immediately." The military's motto is to never give up on anyone. However, sacrificing those who cause trouble and threaten the lives of others only made sense. The military would have realized the necessity of this order sooner or later. Charles's appearance had only hastened the process. Charles asked, "You didn't come here just to talk about this, right?" "Yes. You've caused me a difficult problem." Hughes smiled bitterly. "We've investigated the backgrounds of those people you killed. There was certainly no great loss. However, the practice of vigilante justice still puts us under a lot of pressure." Charles said seriously, "If you want to use this to threaten me into joining the military, don't bother. I just want to be free and happy. I will not be bound by anything." The reason Hughes had said that the military was in a difficult position was to entice Charles to join the army. With such an expert in their ranks, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. Charles had seen through their plans, so he unequivocally rejected them from the beginning, not wanting to be pressured with righteous speeches about honor and duty. However, Hughes said calmly, "It doesn't matter if you don't join. Just based on your and Neil's contributions to the military, as long as you keep your nose clean, the army will be your firm backing. We won't force you to do anything." "So I can enjoy all the benefits, with no obligation to follow orders?" Charles wondered. Charles sneered. "There's no free lunch in this world. Don't play games with me. If you have no further business here, please leave." Hughes took this in stride. "There is one more thing. You and Neil are friends. He is in big trouble right now. We want to help him, but we've limited resources. If you have time, help him if you can." Charles frowned. "Is his life in danger?" Hughes shook his head. "It's not his life, but his reputation. He taught the military techniques which are strictly confidential. Not many people know about it, but a celebrity named Haley Summers does. She's now trying to destroy Neil in the court of public opinion. We do not care about her, but her family is powerful." Charles's eyes turned cold. "Does she want to die?"